The Drakari had ruled the stars for over 1,000 cycles, not by diplomacy, not by strategy, but by sheer, brutal dominance. Gorth, their homeworld, was a planet so savage that even the most feared empires in the galaxy refused to set foot upon it. Its storms could rip apart metal. Its creatures hunted even their own kind, and its surface was a battlefield where only the strongest survived. The Drakari prided themselves as the apex predators of the galaxy. Their war fleets moved from system to system, establishing themselves as the unchallenged rulers of the cosmos. There was no species tougher, no race stronger, or so they thought, until they met the humans. The first reports came from a deep space probe stationed near the Sol system, a blue-green planet teeming with life, Earth. The data was strange. The gravity was tolerable. The climate, while varied, was nowhere near the extremes of Gorth. It was, by all definitions, a comfortable world. Yet, the probe detected something unsettling. The dominant species, bipedal, fragile, lacking natural weaponry, was classified as extremely dangerous by the AI's survival model. A glitch, perhaps? How could something so weak be classified as a threat? Commander Zarkol of the Drakari High Fleet was dispatched to investigate. His mission was simple: evaluate, classify, conquer. Zarkol's ship entered orbit above Earth, cloaked and scanning. He sneered at what he saw. These creatures, humans, were a joke. They had no scales, no claws, no natural armor. Their bodies were soft. On Gorth, even the smallest predators had fangs that could tear through metal. Zarkol was prepared to send back a report that humans were not Deathworlders. Then the war footage came in. He watched in fascination and horror as humans fought wars with each other. Unlike the Drakari, who relied on natural-born weapons and sheer strength, humans adapted. They built weapons, refined them, and worst of all, they thrived in war. They did not just endure hardship. They mastered it. In one clip, Zarkol watched as humans fought in the frozen wastelands of their world, where temperatures should have rendered them immobile. Yet, they moved as though the cold meant nothing. In another, they endured the brutal heat of deserts, their bodies pushing beyond their natural limits to survive. They survived in deep oceans, on mountaintops, in radioactive wastelands. They conquered their own planet. The Drakari prided themselves on their resilience. But they had never needed to adapt. Gorth had simply forced the weak to die and the strong to live. Humans, however, did not just survive their death world. They tamed it. Where the Drakari endured, humans engineered. They had mastered fire, reshaped landscapes, and even modified their own bodies when necessary. Zarkol's admiration turned to unease. What happens when a species like that turns its gaze outward? Then he saw something that shook him to his core. A nuclear explosion, not from a reactor, a weapon. Zarkol had seen planetary catastrophes before. Supervolcanoes, asteroid impacts, solar flares. But never had he witnessed a species do this to itself and survive. These were no mere Deathworlders. These were monsters. The Drakari had a long-standing tradition when encountering a new species. A test of strength was required. A duel of death. If the species champion won, they were deemed worthy of respect. If they lost, they were to be conquered. Zarkol personally delivered the challenge to Earth. The humans agreed. The champion they sent forward was not what the Drakari expected. He was small compared to Zarkol, his skin pale from age. His frame lacked the muscle mass of a warrior. His name was Colonel James Holloway, a retired Special Forces operative. He smiled as he stepped into the arena. That was the first sign of trouble. Zarkol struck first, aiming to crush the human spine with a single blow. Holloway dodged. Then the human countered. A small, insignificant movement, but it sent Zarkol sprawling. He had never been thrown before. Holloway stood over him, adjusting his grip. "You're strong," he admitted. "But strength alone? It's not enough." Zarkol roared and lunged. Holloway sidestepped again, delivering a devastating strike to the nerve clusters in Zarkul's neck. The Drakari staggered. His body locked up. Zarkul was paralyzed. "I've fought worse," Holloway said, rolling his shoulders. "You think your world is tough? You think your storms, your predators, your disasters make you the strongest?" He leaned in. "We made fire our pet. We split the atom just to see what would happen. We wipe out entire species with a thought." Zarkul struggled to move. His own body was betraying him. He could only listen. "You think because your world is cruel, you understand suffering?" Holloway whispered. "You don't know suffering. You don't know war." Then the human smiled again. "But you will." Zarkul awoke hours later. His body ached. His mind reeled. He had lost. No, the Drakari had lost. He returned to Gorith, his pride shattered. He told his people of the humans, not weaklings, but true Deathworlders. More than that, humans weren't just strong. They were terrifying. For the first time in their history, the Drakari did not conquer. They bowed. And humanity? They just smiled. Welcome to the galaxy. For centuries, the Drakari had measured their power in terms of raw strength and endurance. They had never encountered a species whose greatest weapon was not their biology, but their mind. Zarkul's defeat sent shockwaves through Drakari society. The High Council convened an emergency summit, their warlords and scholars all demanding answers. How had a weaker species bested their strongest warrior? How had they turned their world into a forge instead of a tomb? What kind of Deathworlders were these humans? Zarkul stood before them, still feeling the ghost of Holloway's grip on his throat. "They are not like us," he said, his voice raw. "Their bodies are weak, but their will is like iron." He looked into the eyes of his fellow warriors, their golden slits narrowing. "We were shaped by our world's cruelty. They were shaped by their own insanity." The room fell silent. Then Supreme Warlord Krovash, the Unbroken, leaned forward. His thick claws tapped against the war table. "And what do you propose, Zarkul? That we fear them?" His voice was heavy with disdain. "That we kneel before soft-skinned vermin?" Zarkul clenched his fists. "I propose we learn from them." The room erupted into chaos. The very idea was unthinkable. The Drakari did not learn from lesser beings. They crushed them. But Zarkul had seen the truth. Humans were no lesser beings. They were engineers of destruction, architects of survival. If the Drakari did not change, they would not survive the next century. A proposal was made, a second test. This time, not a duel but a war game. The Drakari would send their best warriors, their elite strategists, and place them against humanity's finest. A simulated battle set on a neutral world. The humans agreed immediately. Zarkul was sent as the Drakari commander. He had trained his entire life for war. He had fought in real battles against empires that had crumbled before the might of Gorith's sons and daughters. But as he watched humans prepare, a cold realization sank in. They did not prepare like warriors. They prepared like gods of war. Their officers spoke in fast, clipped tones, using words and symbols that made little sense. Counteroffensive maneuver in 10 minutes. Redirect orbital strikes to grid Delta 3. Deploying adaptive assault teams based on enemy movement projections. Zarkul's forces set up hardened fortifications, an impenetrable defensive line. The humans did not care. They did not attack directly. They disrupted supply lines. They jammed communications. They tricked the Drakari forces into thinking an attack was coming from one side, then struck from another. The Drakari played war. Humans lived it. Zarkul fought until the last simulated soldier fell. His entire fleet was crushed. The war games ended in total human victory. Krovash, the supreme warlord, stood in stunned silence as the results were announced. Never before had the Drakari lost so completely. But the humans did not celebrate. They did not mock. Instead, they offered an alliance. "We are not your enemies," Holloway told Krovash. "You've ruled the stars through strength. We respect that, but we don't conquer. We build, and we make our allies stronger. Krovash glared at the human general. You expect us to become your servants? Holloway laughed. We don't want you to serve us. We want you to fight with us. That was when the Drakari finally understood. Humans did not seek war, but they were born for it. They did not seek destruction, but they mastered it. And they did not fear Deathworlders, because they were Deathworlders. By the end of the night, the Drakari-human alliance was forged. An empire of warriors and tacticians. A union of brute strength and terrifying ingenuity. For the first time in history, the Drakari did not stand alone. And as the galaxy watched, as enemies trembled at the sight of human ships flying alongside Drakari war beasts, one undeniable truth was written into the stars. The galaxy would never be the same. The moment the Drakari-human alliance was forged, the balance of power in the galaxy shifted overnight. For centuries, the Drakari had been feared as unstoppable conquerors. Now, they stood shoulder to shoulder with a species that had rewritten the very definition of war. The first test of this alliance came sooner than expected. Beyond the known edges of the galactic frontier, a war had been simmering for generations. The Korthan Dominion, a brutal, insectoid empire spanning hundreds of worlds, had watched humanity's rise with growing unease. The Korthan were ancient, their conquests spanning millennia. They had fought every major species in the known galaxy and won. When they heard of the Drakari-human alliance, they did not hesitate. They declared war, and they did so with an invading fleet of over 10,000 warships, launching a direct strike at both Earth and Goreth. The Korthan believed they had the upper hand. The Drakari were strong, but their war doctrine was outdated. Their reliance on brute force and instinct had led to vulnerabilities in previous conflicts. Humans, while dangerous, had never faced an empire like the Korthan, or so they thought. What the Korthan did not understand was that humans were never static. They evolved, adapted, and above all, they learned from their enemies. This time, they had learned from the Drakari. And the Drakari? They had learned from humanity. When the Korthan fleets arrived, they did not find divided worlds. They did not find two separate militaries struggling to work together. They found a combined war machine, honed and perfected by both species. The first mass battle took place in orbit over Titan, Saturn's largest moon. The Korthan deployed planet cracker weapons, preparing to shatter Titan's surface and cripple the human supply lines. But before they could fire, the Drakari struck. Clad in heavily reinforced drop armor, Drakari warriors launched themselves from orbit, slamming into Korthan ships like living meteorites. Their bodies, evolved for the brutal gravity of Goreth, ripped through enemy hulls like wet paper. The Korthan responded with bioplasma artillery, tearing through the Drakari boarding pods. It should have been a slaughter. It wasn't. Because while the Drakari tore through enemy ships, the humans were already 3 steps ahead. Human cyber warfare teams hacked into Korthan battle networks, turning their own warships against one another. Orbital snipers, wielding magnetically accelerated railguns, picked off Korthan commanders from miles away. Tactical nuclear strikes erupted across the battlefield, detonated with pinpoint precision, crippling enemy formations before they could retaliate. The Korthan, for the first time in their history, knew fear. The war raged on for months, stretching across dozens of battlefronts. But with every battle, the truth became clear. The Korthan had never fought Deathworlders before. They had fought strong species. They had fought intelligent species. They had fought tacticians and strategists. But they had never fought a species that thrived in war. And now, they were fighting 2 of them. Humans did not merely survive hardship. They turned it into an advantage. Drakari did not merely endure battle. They relished it. Together, they created a new kind of warfare. They called it the Deathworld Doctrine. It was not about brute strength. It was not about technology alone. It was about exploiting chaos, weaponizing survival, turning entire battlefields into killing fields that only Deathworlders could endure. The Korthan, outnumbering the Alliance 10-1, were systematically annihilated. One Korthan warlord, upon witnessing a human Drakari assault firsthand, sent a final transmission to his Dominion leaders. "We thought we ruled the galaxy. We were wrong. We have awakened something far worse than ourselves. Gods help us all." The Korthan Dominion collapsed within the year. Their once mighty empire, built over 1,000 generations, was reduced to nothing in mere months. Survivors surrendered unconditionally. Those who resisted were hunted across the stars. The war was over, and in its wake, something far greater had been born. The Drakari-Human Alliance was no longer just a military pact. It was the new superpower of the galaxy, the apex of Deathworlders, and the galaxy had no choice but to acknowledge it. One by one, the other great empires of the cosmos bowed before them, not out of conquest, but out of sheer respect. Because if humans and Drakari had taught the galaxy anything, it was this: a Deathworld does not make the strongest species. A Deathworlder does. And now, the greatest of them stood united. For the first time in history, the galaxy belonged to the Deathworlders. On a distant world, beyond the known frontier, a strange transmission was intercepted. A new species, unknown to the Alliance, was speaking in hushed, terrified tones. The humans, the Drakari, they have found each other. They are growing stronger. If they continue to evolve together, nothing in the galaxy will stop them. We must act now. There was silence. Then another voice, older, weary. "No, it is too late. The apex has already risen. Pray they never turn their eyes upon us." Transmission ends.